Hello and good afternoon. Today is, well, it's supposed to be, actually, today's Thursday, but today is Monday, September the 21st. We are, I think, finishing up our unit on the Reformation, the first part of the Reformation. And, I did announce that our test on this unit is um, September the 25th. September the 25th, not October 2nd. Yes, September the 25th, the end of this week. So, all right. And so let's get down to it, talking about our good friend, Henry VIII, the nicest man in the world. Yes, am I correct in saying that? I think, yeah. Anyway, so Henry married a total of 6 wives. Of course, he married Catherine of Aragon, the widow of his brother. And then he married the already pregnant Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn, by the way, like I said, was the younger of the two sisters. And she also, if you're ever at a party and you want to impress someone, she also had 6 fingers on each hand. Yeah, I bet it was fun shopping for gloves, don't you? Yeah. Anyway, so, and if you watch that, and you can watch that entire film, The Other Boleyn Girl, the film raises the conjecture. See, I mean, that Anne had miscarried her second child. She had one. Anne had the one girl, Elizabeth, who will later become Elizabeth I. And of course, Henry VIII was not happy about that. And I mean, Henry VIII, I can't say enough about what a nice man he was. His wife has a daughter, he gets rid of her. Too bad he didn't know the scientific truth of the fact that it is the male that carries the male chromosome. So, in other words, it was Henry who was misfiring. At any rate, so Anne had Elizabeth, and then she became pregnant again, and things were nice. And then she miscarried. And she, of course, was worried about her future prospects. If you watch the film, she was actually worried that he would declare her a witch or something like that. And so, according to the film and the official charges, Anne concocts temporarily a plan to become pregnant through her brother George Boleyn. And if you watch the film, the three of them, Anne, Mary, and George, discuss it. And at first, George kind of okay, and then Mary says, "I don't want any part of this," and then they don't carry through with it. However, it's found. I mean, you can't keep any secrets. You can't keep any secrets in that palace. Henry has eyes and spies everywhere. And in fact, it was George's wife who went to tell the king that something was going on. And Anne Boleyn was accused of both witchcraft, adultery, and treason, and incest. Yeah, several things. Which, of course, saw her be condemned to death. And by the way, if you watch that snippet yesterday, I mean, it's really amazing. I like watching movies, and we all sit there and we watch movies, and, we forget that these people are acting. And Natalie Portman, who plays Anne Boleyn in the film The Other Boleyn Girl, Natalie Portman is just amazing as, going in. I mean, she is sitting there and she makes herself cry and she makes herself tremble, and you believe that she's about to have her head cut off. And anyway, it's a great scene. I hope you took the time to watch it. So Anne Boleyn was executed, beheaded, and then Henry married Jane Seymour, who, for what it's worth, he was courting already before he got rid of his second wife. Henry VIII is just awesome. But anyway, and she died. Jane Seymour died shortly after giving birth to Edward the Sixth. Yeah, yeah, a male, which is what Henry VIII wanted. Problem was, Jane Seymour died, and Edward the Sixth, throughout his entire life, was sickly and will die at a young age. But yeah, then he marries and divorces a German princess. Her name was Anne of Cleves. I mean, it was one of those marriages where once again Henry was, I got to find somebody to marry. Of course, no Catholic in the universe is going to want to have anything to do with him, and so he crosses the English Channel and goes to Germany, which was Protestant, to marry this Anne of Cleves. They had never met. I mean, he didn't cross. He basically reach an agreement, and she comes across to marry him, and right off the bat they decide they can't stand each other, and they divorce right away. His fifth wife was Catherine Howard. Catherine Howard was just really stupid, because Catherine Howard, but I mean, at the same time, you got to remember Henry VIII is in his 40s, and the athletic, virile Henry VIII, who Catherine of Aragon had married and Boleyn had married, was gone. And Henry VIII, who had eaten too many turkey legs and drank too many beers, was now marrying this Catherine Howard. And she was a teenage girl. I'm talking 14, 15 years old. And the very definition of stupid, because she actually did carry on a relationship with a boy her age. And of course, they thought they could keep it secret, and were, discovered, accused of adultery and treason, and beheaded in 1542. Then he married his sixth wife, Catherine Parr, who actually survived him. So how do we remember the six wives of Henry VIII? Well, it goes like this: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Yeah. Anyway, so Henry, even though he left the Roman Catholic Church, you can tell in this new church that he creates, he didn't care one whit. In fact, I've seen several questions about this. Henry VIII he didn't care anything about religious, and let's learn a new word, dogma, D-O-G-M-A, dogma. It means religious teachings, religious doctrine. Although there was a film in the 1980s called Dogma, interesting film. I would like to recommend you to watch it because it is very funny, but has lots of cursing in it. It stars Silent J and Bob. No, Jay and Silent Bob. Stars Chris Rock as Rufus, the 13th disciple. Stars Natalie Imbruglia, I think, actually plays the role of God. But yeah, it's a very, very sacrilegious film, very sarcastic film about religious teachings. But dogma is religious. So Henry VIII didn't care anything about dogma, anything about, he basically he wanted to have an outlet to where he could still rule his country and have as many wives as he wanted. Henry VIII, and here's the essence of the questions that you see, he made very, very, very few changes in the church, from turning it from Roman Catholic to the new name, and we need to know the name, the Anglican Church. Anglican, Anglican Church. And the Anglican Church, oh wait, where is the closest Anglican church? Anyone? Actually, probably about 7,000 miles away. But you're saying, but Mr. Horton, now wait a minute. This country was founded by English colonists. Shouldn't there be some Anglicans still here? Well, yes and no. You see, the thing of it was, after the American Revolution, calling yourself a member of the Anglican or Church of England, not really popular. And so they changed the name of the church to, anyone? Come on, I see you out there, Mr. York. Episcopalian. Yeah, Episcopalian. Interesting church, Episcopalians. I mean, since they split off the Roman Catholic Church with succeeding monarchs, they did make several changes in Catholic religion, but Henry VIII didn't do any of that. Henry VIII just wanted his own church. As long as I can have as many wives as I want, I don't care. Okay, so he forbade his clergy, the priest, from marrying or from having sexual relations. I won't laugh anymore. In the 6 Articles of 1539, he, Henry VIII, reaffirmed transubstantiation. Told you that. Right, Mr. Arlinghouse? Transubstantiation. We all remember what that means. Transubstantiation. The belief that when you ingest the Holy Communion wafer and the wine in the cup, that they actually are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. Denied the Eucharistic cup to the laity. You say, oh, what does that mean? Well, that's the cup, the wine. To the laity, that means people who aren't priests, which Jan Hus died for, by the way. Jan Hus wanted to share the cup with everyone. Declared celibate vows inviolable. Horton, big words. Why do you do this to me? Because you need to learn big words. You got to quit reading Dick and Jane storybooks. It means that priests had to remain celibate, no sex. In Henry VIII's Anglican Church, the priests could not marry or have sex. Trust me, that has changed since then in the Anglican and or Episcopalian Church. In fact, in the Episcopalian Church is actually one of the more liberal churches in Western Christianity. Episcopalian ministers, ordained ministers, priests are often married, often women. Provided for private masses and ordered the continuation of the auricular confession. That means confession of priest. Okay, England had to wait until his death. I don't know why this writing was so terrible. His death being Henry VIII before it became a true Protestant country. Henry died, and his son, the boy, Edward VI, became the king. Under Edward VI, they make real Protestant changes. England became a true Protestant nation. Notice it says under his regents. Edward VI. Edward VI is 10 years old. He's still playing with his Star Wars toys. And so he can't be expected to make monumental decisions like cutting off heads and declaring war and things like that. So those decisions are made for him by his regents. A regent is a person who rules in the stead of someone else, a regent. The Act of Uniformity passed in 1552, and the Book of Common Prayer became a standard part of the English Church, the Anglican Church. These moderate Protestant reforms were short-lived, however, when Edward VI died, and he was replaced by Catherine of Aragon's daughter, Mary. Mary, yes. We're blowing through this so fast. Mary, Bloody Mary, she was called. Mary never liked the fact that her mother, Catherine of Aragon, was not only kicked out of the royal palace, she had to spend the rest of her life in a monastery. No, not a monastery, a convent. Sorry, Mr. Arlinghouse. A convent. You know what a convent is, right? Mr. Arlinghouse could tell you. In fact, just about any Catholic school child could tell you, which is, once again, an advantage. A convent is where nuns live. Anyway, there's a convent really right across from Covington Catholic High School, the Notre Dame, where the Notre Dame nuns live. Not that there's a lot of them left. But anyway, and I'm really rambling today, aren't I? Aren't I, Mr. York? So, I hope I'm not boring you, Mr. Fuller. So, these moderate Protestant reforms were short-lived when Edward VI died, replaced by Mary I. Well, Mary I was hacked off because, not only did her mother get kicked out, put into a convent, but Mary grew up there. And there's not a whole lot of less fun places in the world than a convent. Trust me on this. Trust me on this. And so Mary I eventually becomes queen, and when she goes to the throne, she makes it her personal business to return England back to Roman Catholicism. Now try and wrap your head around this. When Henry VIII said, okay, guys, all you English guys, we are going to all become not Catholic. We are going to leave the Catholic Church. Lots of people, like Thomas More, in England got upset and actually protested and actually said stuff for which they were repaid, if they said it too loudly, by having their head unceremoniously removed from their body or being burned at the stake. And so, everybody said, okay, Henry, we'll do it. And then Henry dies. And then Edward VI comes along and kind of reinforces what Henry VIII did. And then along comes Mary I, Bloody Mary. Now, all those people who had stood in line said, yes, we're Anglican, we're not Catholic. She does the same thing with them. Burns them at the stake for being heretics, for the crime of heresy. Mary died then. Mary had a tumor. Yeah. She was really Mary, and by the way, Mary I married King Philip II of Spain. Once again, another political marriage. The two had never seen each other. They really, Philip II married her because, hey, he gets to be kind of the King of England, and she's kind of the Queen of Spain. It was the idea of uniting their two countries. Although Philip II spent most of his time back in Spain, of course, and Mary spent all her time in England killing Protestants, and so Mary developed a tumor. Not because of that, but she did, and she died. And somehow Elizabeth, the first daughter of the only daughter of Anne Boleyn, survived Mary's rantings, and she became the next Queen of England. In fact, Elizabeth will reign in England. The so-called Golden Age of Elizabeth, I think, lasted between 40 and 50 years. Now, Elizabeth, a moderate, And that's right. Let's learn a new word, shall we? That word is, and you're writing, politique. 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 So what's a politic, Mr. Horton? A politic is a person who sets aside his own personal convictions in order to stay in power. Elizabeth I was a politic. She may or may not have been a Anglican. We really won't know because when she becomes queen, her primary goal was to remain queen. Because trust me, there were lots of people who wanted to kill Elizabeth. There was more than one attempt on her life. And she also was able to avoid marriage proposals, one of which came from none other than Philip II himself. But you said, wait a minute, Jordan, Philip II married her half sister. Isn't that incestuous? Yeah, but it didn't seem to bother him. She also received proposals from princes in France, princes in Germany, and she dodged them all. Why did she dodge them all? Did she not like men? No, it wasn't that at all. But she knew that if she ties herself to one person, she automatically makes enemies of others. And so she tried to remain. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on, shall we? So Elizabeth I is the Queen of England for the next 40 years. So seeing their grip on their it should be there on their constituency. I like that word, constituency. You say, what's a constituency? Membership. Seeing their grip on their membership on the Catholics, losing its hold, the Roman Catholic Church, RCC, get used to that, began to reform itself from within through the efforts of several groups. Many new religious orders sprang up. One of these was the Theatines. You say, what are these, Mr. Orton? Religious orders are groups within, particularly the Roman Catholic Church, who emphasize a certain idea or doctrine. They don't contradict other doctrines within the church. They just say this is more important. For example, as Mr. Arlinghouse can tell you, St. X in Cincinnati is a Jesuit school, part of the Society of Jesus. By the same token, his alma mater, Covenant Catholic, is a Marianist school of the Society of Mary. So that's what orders are. They emphasize one thing or the other. The Marianist schools really emphasize Mary, the mother of Jesus. Anyway, one of these was Theatines. Then there was the Capuchins, who made an awesome cup of coffee. I'm just kidding. Get it? Cappuccino. But I mean, it's where the name comes from. The Capuchins were recognized by the Pope in 1528 and sought to restore the ideas of St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis of Assisi was about ministering to the poor. The Psalmites and the Barnabites directed their efforts at repairing moral, spiritual, and physical damage done to people in the war-torn areas of Italy. Remember that during the Renaissance, Italy was invaded by both Spain and France. The Ursulines took up the education of girls, as Mr. Arlinghouse can also tell you. If you go to Cincinnati, there's not one but two Ursuline schools. There's St. Ursula and there's Ursuline Academy, both named after St. Ursula, who was the original founder of the Ursuline order of nuns. The Oratorians devoted themselves to the promotion of religious literature and church music. And finally, last but not least, although it's so funny, there's the Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits, and was organized by St. Ignatius of Loyola. And I say it's funny because there's a lot of jealousy within the Roman Catholic Church against the Jesuits. Mr. Arlinghouse, I was friends with a lot of priests in my 28 years at Calcath. And I mean, the word Jesuit comes up, and they also go, they think they're so special. They think they're so smart and all this kind of stuff. But anytime you see a school or a church, a Catholic church, and it's called St. Ignatius or St. X, which is a tribute to St. Francis Xavier, it is a part of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. The Jesuits were an order dedicated to A, fighting Protestantism, B, missionary work. The first missionaries in the Catholic Church were the Jesuits. They sent the first they established the first Catholic churches in the far-flung reaches of places like China, Japan, India, under St. Francis Xavier. So like I said, anytime you see an X, like in Louisville or in Cincinnati or St. Pius X, no, that's not true. St. X, not St. Pius. They are Jesuits, Jesuit schools. And if you go to any big city, you will find several Saints, like in Chicago, St. Iggy's, Cleveland, there's a St. Iggy's, then St. X, But, oh yes, one of their other great commitments of the Jesuits was the establishment of excellent schools. And to be real honest, St. X in Cincinnati, even though their tuition is $15,000, $16,000, they still turn people away every year. All right. So Charles V, the Habsburg Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, forced Pope Paul, the next pope, after Leo X, to call together the Council of Trent in northern Italy to basically reform the church. They said, look, we are losing members in the Catholic Church like water through a sieve. So we got to do something to stop this. And so they called together this Council of Trent. There were 3 sessions of the Council of Trent. The most important reforms concerned church discipline. You say, what does that mean? To make these people, these bishops, these priests, do what they took an oath to be doing, to actually minister to the people as opposed to ministering to their pocketbooks and to their lust and to their hungers. Many clerics, once again, remember there are three estates: the clergy, clergy. They're members of the priesthood. Many clerics had to move from Rome to the parishes they were actually supposed to be serving in. Because once again, remember, it was a thing prior to the Council of Trent. It was a thing for the monsignors, the head priests of the various far-flung parishes to, this is my parish out here in Never Land, where there's not even roads to it, but they live in Rome. Why? Because there's parties in Rome. And so the Council of Trent said, go do your job. That's one thing. Even bishops were required to live in their districts and to preach regularly and be visible in their parish. However, look at that number 5. Not a single doctrinal concession was made to the Protestants. They didn't say, and they weren't going to say, that, maybe Martin Luther was right, or maybe John Calvin was right. No. The Catholic Church was going to just clean up their own ship, become more disciplined. And here's another thing that the Catholic Church did, and we'll study about it more in the next chapter. Let's write this word down. Baroque. 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 If it's not Baroque, no, I'm just kidding. Baroque. It's a art style, an artistic style that when the Protestants began building their churches, actually the Protestants didn't build any churches. What the Protestants did when they took over a region, they kicked the Catholics out of their churches, and then they stripped all the finery, all the statues, all the icons, all the glitter, all the beautiful, bright paintings were stripped. They even smashed the stained glass windows, you see, and then replaced them with clear glass. And so, yeah, they made the churches plain. Now, you say, what's that got to do with Baroque, Mr. Horton? The Catholics said, we're going the opposite direction. We're going to make our churches look really, really, really nice and gaudy. And we're going to talk about Baroque art in our next chapter. But you've got to see, that's the thing. You got to know the difference between Renaissance art and Baroque art. They are different. Baroque art just gets in fact, the word Baroque means, and you're writing, misshapen pearl. It's really ornate, really bright, really gaudy, really it has little fine, all over everything. And we'll look at some pictures of what Baroque is and Baroque examples of art. But yeah, so they didn't surrender. Not one doctrinal concession. No, you still need to go to confession. No, you still need to do the 7 sacraments. None of that stuff, Martin Luther said, is worth spitting on. So, part C. Even though the church used the Spanish conquest to convert Indians of the West to the Roman Catholic Church, the clergy were among the strongest defenders and sympathizers to the rights of Native Americans. When we study the transatlantic economy later on, we're going to talk about how the Spanish and Portuguese treated Native Americans. In short, not good. Now, a lot of their Native American deaths did occur as a result of disease. I mean, the Europeans were carrying all these diseases to which the Native Americans, smallpox could wipe out entire villages, kill every single Native American in the village, for example. But also, truth be told, we'll study about something called the encomienda system. And the encomienda system was a contract that was forced upon the Native Americans. And like I said, we'll get to this later. Do you have to write this down? No, but you need to. I'm introducing it to you. The encomienda system was a system where the conquering Spanish demanded a certain number of adult males from the Native American community, their village or whatever. They had to, for 1 year, work for the Spanish, and the work was backbreaking, either working in the mines or working crops, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end of the year, the Spanish would receive another group of Native Americans. And spoiler alert, guys, you can be worked to death. Yeah. And the Spanish, this was, rental slavery. And what eventually began to be happening was they basically were the work and the disease was killing these Native Americans, and Native population being wiped out. And so the Roman Catholic Church did step in and say, look, guys, you got to quit doing this to these people. And then, of course, the Spanish, the Portuguese said, yeah, but we got all this work that's got to be done. We can't do it. And so the Roman Catholic Church, they didn't say, hey, go to Africa and start shipping out people, but they sort of thought using Africans as laborers was somewhat more acceptable. In other words, the church, yes, was racially prejudiced at this time. I mean, yeah, doing all that stuff to Africans, okay, yeah, sure, that's okay. All right, so by the end of the 16th century, the Roman Catholic Church in America had become a tool for maintaining the colonial status quo. In other words, the Roman Catholic Church reinforced the at first the encomienda system and the European rule over North and Central and South America. The church helped and supported European control of Latin America. The Reformation, though, brought about radical changes in traditional religious practices and institutions where it succeeded. You say, what does that mean? The Reformation changed life. And 15 will show, Roman numeral 15 you're looking at there shows you the situations. Roman numeral 16 shows you how it was changed. Okay, so the church calendar, and this is in the 15th century, church calendar regulated daily life. About 1/3 of the entire year was given over to some kind of religious observation or celebration in Europe. There was a booming business in religion. You say, what does that mean? The sale of religious artifacts, the sale of indulgences, the sale of, like the tooth of John the Baptist, or look, here's some Jesus sweat or whatever. And I'm not lying. They would sell anything like that. This was the age of faith, remember. And yes, many clergymen walked the streets with concubines. And, Mr. Horton, what's a concubine? A concubine, in fact, if you look in the Old Testament tells us that King Solomon had 300 wives and 700 concubines. What's a concubine? A concubine's a wife you don't have to talk to. All right, there it is. Anyway, I can hear Mr. Arlinghouse laughing all the way from here. So, but yeah. Many clergy walked the streets with concubines, children just walking behind them, and it was obvious that those children were fathered by the priest. All right, Roman 16. In the 16th century, these things began to change. For example, overall numbers of the clergy fell by 2/3 because being a member of the clergy wasn't the cushy job it once was anymore. And religious holidays shrank by also 1/3. They converted this. I know what happened. They converted this from a Word document to a PDF, and so a lot of things got changed. And then trying to convert it back to a Word document, you lose some stuff. Services, more and more services were performed in the vernacular in the Protestant churches. Please tell me you know what that means. Vernacular. I wrote the whole Bible in the vernacular. Come on, didn't you pay attention to the Martin Luther 95 Theses rap? Vernacular, the language of the common people. So service is being performed in the language of the people who were hearing, as opposed to Latin. Protestant clergy could marry, and most did, and they paid taxes, and most were punished for their crimes in civil court. However, see that stat? Notice how I wrote that? Italics, bolden. Over half the original people who left the Roman Catholic Church for the Protestant churches returned before the end of the 16th century. That's an interesting statistic. Half of Europe had been Protestant by the mid-16th century, but only 1/5 of the population were Protestant by the end of the 16th century. Yeah, interesting. Education, as a result of the Protestant Reformation, reflected a more and more humanistic tint. It is important to know that Martin Luther did an invaluable service in the cause of education. Because remember, what did Martin Luther say? Martin Luther said, every man is his own priest, right? So therefore, if every man's his own priest, that means every man is responsible for his own salvation. So how do you achieve salvation? Well, you have to know what God wants you to do. Well, how do you know what God wants you to do? Well, either somebody can tell you, but remember, you're your own priest, or you have to read the Bible. But what if you can't read? Ta-da! You need to know how to read. And see that one thing, the idea that to be able to get to heaven, you have to know what the Word of God says. To know what the Word of God says, you have to be able to read the Bible. To be able to read the Bible, you have to be able to know how to read. And so people read the Bible, but they also read other things. So, Luther and Philip Melanchthon pressed for universal compulsory education. It means all children going to school so that both boys and girls could reach literacy in the Bible. Remember, every man his own priest. The Protestant Reformation caused a promotion on the outlook towards women. Protestants had stressed equality in marriage. They were joking, of course. The idea of a partnership. And like I said, they were joking. And I'm not talking about me or anybody else. The Protestants were joking. This saw a rise in allowable divorce rates. So, yeah, people did get divorced more and more in the Protestant church. Protestants did push for the education of girls in the vernacular. However, women were discriminated against with Protestants just as they were in the Roman Catholic Church. We're, once again, talking about women. History is his story, and that's not going to change in European history. Family life changed in the Protestant Reformation. People married later in life. Late marriages reflected the difficulty of supporting oneself economically. In the 16th century, 1 in 5 women never married. Now, get this statistic. So, in the 16th century, 1 in 5 women never married, okay? And combined with the 15% who were widowed, to make up a large percentage of the population. So basically, you're looking at 35% of the female population were single adults. And remember what I said about witches and being burned. The great majority of women who were burned as witches were alone. They had no support system. Anyway, delayed marriages increased premarital sex and raised the number of illegitimate children. Please don't let your parents tell you that, only recently did young people start having sex outside of marriage. No. Arranged marriages, although still done, were reduced. The Western nuclear family consisted of a man, wife, and children. The average family had 7 or 8 children because the thinking was that, as it says there, fully 1/3 of your 7 or 8 children died at some point before they reached adulthood. And so if you want enough kids to help, A, help you work the farm, and B, take care of you as you grew older, you had lots of kids. And you hoped that there were sons amongst them. The church resisted birth control from that day to this, and birth control was primarily ineffective when used. I mean, to be honest, I've read another book where the most often used form of birth control was something called coitus interruptus. It means in the middle of sex, stop having sex. It's not effective. So anyway, back to the matter at hand. So the church still resisted birth control, and whatever they used, I mean, they came up with some really doozy birth controls. Alligator poop was supposed to be a contraceptive. And you know what? I think it would have been a great contraceptive, alligator. No! Anyway, so wet nursing, and I misspelled that, or did I? I think, yeah, W. Don't we have an H in there? Yeah, I think that's it. Wet nursing, and it's one word. Wet nursing, no, guess not. Wet nursing was popular amongst the well-to-do, but it was also a way to spread disease. Yeah, it seemed that the well-to-do did not want to nurse their own children, so it was a very popular thing to hand off their children to the poor. The sad thing about it was, though, that oftentimes the poor women they handed them off to would deny their own children so they could earn money. And yeah, it was a way to spread disease. Children between the ages of 8 and 13 were regularly sent away on apprenticeships and employment in the homes of relatives or friends. Very quickly, and we're writing somewhere in the margin of our notes, apprenticeship. You see, a system evolved. A system evolved where a system evolved. Right there. Give me that. Yes. A system evolved where people would, let's see, hey, a system evolved where a child who wanted to learn a trade would go become an apprentice. But first of all, he would be sent away to a master craftsman, where the first stage was that he was an apprentice. Now, as an apprentice, he learned to, he basically cleaned up. And after that, he became what was called a journeyman. See, once the child, becomes like 15, 16, 17, he has mastered the craft, but he does not have a license. He can't just go out and make his own shop. So what he does, he travels around and sells his services to, in other words, he goes to another master craftsman and says, I can do this. I'll work for you. And, that way the master craftsman says, sure, I can use your labor if he can. The word journeyman comes from the French word journée, which refers to the joint between the hip and the ankle. Get it? Sure. Yeah. And so then after he has done that and he has the wherewithal, he he takes an exam and creates a masterpiece, meaning that he creates a piece and it is deemed by his judges, the guildsmen, to be of good quality, and pays a fee. We need to learn what guilds are. I mean, guilds, you see that word there, guilds, the purpose of a guild is to not to make better products. The purpose of the guild is to make sure that everybody can make money. Because if there are too many shoemakers in a city, then you can't charge enough for your shoes to make a profit. And so if a shoemaker shows up in your city and says, I'm going to start my own shop, you burn him down because you can't have too many shoemakers. But so, yeah. And by the way, these guilds were the first forms of city government. All right. Widowers and widows often remarried quickly, as divorce or death would ruin a woman economically. Okay, there were no writers of this age to note. Miguel de Cervantes rejected idealism. Miguel de Cervantes, as you know, wrote the book Don Quixote. Yes, Don Quixote. Please tell me you've heard of Don Quixote. Don Quixote, yeah. Don Quixote had spent, or rather, Miguel de Cervantes had spent 5 years as a slave in Algeria. If you've ever looked at his book or read his book, trust me, I haven't read it either. But it's about this old knight who still believes in the old ways of chivalry, and he's nearly blind. His squire is a commoner by the name of Sancho Panza, who of course he's a commoner, he's not a knight, but he's Sancho Panza has common sense. For example, the most famous scene in the entire book, Don Quixote, it was when Don Quixote sees a windmill and thinks it's a dragon, and so he mounts his horse and charges into the windmill, and of course the windmill just knocks him out. And the whole time Don Quixote says, "Senor, I don't think it's a good idea." But anyway, but see, common sense. William Shakespeare was more of a product of the Reformation in England. In fact, when you talk about the Renaissance in England, there is no Renaissance in England except William Shakespeare. Yeah, in England there is no Renaissance except Shakespeare. Shakespeare, was a follower of the body. In fact, Shakespeare, and I know you've all been exposed to Shakespeare. Shakespeare is often called the bawdy bard. Bawdy's like risque, In fact, a lot of his plays make very subtle sexual references. His themes were deeply rooted in contemporary religious traditions. Yeah, but that's what we have for this unit. Now, this Friday, we will take our test on this unit. Okay. Are there any questions? Oh, no, maybe one day, right? All right, so I'm going to let you guys go. Test is Friday, September 27th. Hasta la vista, baby.